On today's show, we are talking about why M1 is keeping Apple simple, and simplicity is always the best way. I'm iCaveDave and I simplify Apple so that everything just works for you, and if you want the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours every weekday at 12 UTC, like this video, subscribe to the channel and ring my notification bell so you can join the notification squad. And before we get into today's news and ICave Answers, which is, to be honest, we're doing a lot more ICave Answers than news today, we have the results of yesterday's What's That Thing competition that I was running. So, yesterday I showed you this and asked you what it is, and we did have some people that got it right. So we had Arthur Swart, Marsing, Phil Rosaleek and Greg Freeman, Brandy Kotlovsky, Bibasic7 and Just Ordinary 223 on Twitter. So yes, you guys guessed correctly. This is the kind of speaker grill for one of these. This is the Apple Pro speaker. These used to come with the iMac G4. They were like an option for the Sunflower iMac, but also they did very much the same speaker with a black rubber surround. That was for the G4 Cube that's behind me. Now, I have a set of both, the G4 Cubes ones with the black surround, the rubber kind of perished straight away, but these white ones, pretty much still in mint condition. And they were designed for Apple by Harman Kardon, just like the sound sticks, and they kind of all fit into that same kind of look, which is pretty cool. So thank you everyone that entered. We are going to do another one today. So here is the image. So yes, I've taken this picture at a bit of a weird angle. There is a clue in the image that isn't the product itself, so let me know your thoughts on what this is down in the comments. And we'll do the same again tomorrow. But for today's show, I wanted to talk about simplicity. Now, Apple is a company that kind of runs on simplicity. When you look at Apple's website, you are not just greeted by a huge number of different products that all do the same thing. Whereas if you go to Dell or someone like that, they've got crazy names that don't mean anything. And this is this goes back to when Steve Jobs returned to Apple, and he introduced this product grid, because when he returned to Apple in the late 90s, they had products like the Newton range, the Performers, all sorts of weird stuff that didn't really make any kind of sense, all overlapped each other. And the way that Steve reduced the complexity in Apple's product lines was he introduced this grid. The grid itself has become quite famous, but essentially it just breaks down what products are required. iCaveDave.com/merch. So what Steve wanted to do was basically have a consumer laptop, a consumer desktop, and then a pro laptop and a pro desktop, rather than having all of these kind of products that overlapped each other. And on his return, that was the first priority, was to fill this grid. So what we originally got was consumer desktop was the iMac, consumer laptop was the iBook, pro desktop was the Power Mac, and pro laptop was the Power Book. So it was super easy. If it had power in it, it was pro. If it had I at the beginning, it was consumer. And these products worked brilliantly. They just captured the imagination. They were really able to make Apple's website just so much more simple to navigate. When you wanted to buy one, it was simple to see what you wanted, and then you configured it from there. And to be completely honest, Apple hasn't strayed too far from that in their current Macs. So if we look at the Mac line, you have your MacBook Air, which is now your consumer. You have the MacBook Pro. You have the iMac as consumer in general, although they have brought in the iMac Pro and removed it again, and also the Mac Pro. Now, the only additional Mac kind of category that we have is the Mac Mini, which was originally introduced to be like a gateway drug for people moving over from Windows, where they could just replace their huge tower with a little Mac Mini and bring their own keyboard, mouse and display from their PC. The M1 fits right into this because it removes another decision point. People, when they want to buy a computer, they want a computer that will do what they need. And when you looked at the way that Apple's website was with Intel, you still had these product categories, but then within them, you had a lot of Intel model numbers that didn't really make any sense to anyone, like an i3 versus an i5 versus an i7 versus an i9. Like, are even numbers not a thing? These Core i chips had different generations within them, and it wasn't clear to people what they are. I mean, if you actually know what the model numbers mean, then you've got the first little chunk is the generation, and then you've got something else that doesn't really make a huge amount of sense. But what Apple's done now is said, if you want a Mac, this is the chip that has the power that you need. Pick what frame you want it to go in, basically. So you can now get an M1 that comes in a MacBook Air, which is thin and light. You can get it in the MacBook Pro, which is the one that lasts longer, and you've got some extra features like the touch bar and a slightly better display. If you want a desktop, you can now get a Mac Mini, or you can get an iMac. And obviously the Mac Pro will be on the way as well. But we have a consumer and a pro version. I would say that the the Mac Mini is probably more of a pro computer than the iMac. Most consumers will go for the one that's all-in-one. They don't have to do anything apart from plug it in. Whereas the Mac Mini gives you a lot more customization. You can choose your own displays, you can choose your own keyboard and mouse, you can choose your own storage that you hang off the back. It all makes sense. But actually a lot of Apple's other stuff kind of fits into this grid as well in terms of consumer and pro. So the iPhone, your consumer iPhone is the iPhone 12. Your consumer on-the-go iPhone, if you like, is the iPhone 12 mini. It's the lightest one, it's the easiest to take around with you. The Pro for if you're working at home would be the Pro Max, biggest screen and obviously the least convenient to take around with you, and the Pro on the go would be the 12 Pro. And obviously we're not saying that you can't take any of these other iPhones with you, but these are the most portable. If you go for the smaller one, you know, you're not kind of carrying around as much. And the same with iPads. Your consumer for at home would be the iPad. Your consumer on the go would be the iPad mini. Pro at home would be the iPad Pro. And your Pro to go would be either the iPad Pro 11-inch or the iPad Air. And I have said in the past that I don't really know why we have an iPad Air as well as an iPad Pro 11-inch. I don't think we need to have both. Either get rid of the consumer at home one, which is the iPad, or combine that with the Air. That just makes more sense to me. But Apple loves having that low entry point in price. And actually it even comes through to their audio stuff. When you look at what Apple has done in their audio products now, if you kind of discount Beats and you look at just Apple's own branded stuff, your consumer home item is the HomePod Mini. The consumer to go is the AirPods. Your Pro at home is the AirPods Max, and your Pro on the go, AirPods Pro. That actually fits really nicely into the grid, surprisingly well. So what do you think about this? I think that Apple has done a really good job of actually kind of keeping everything quite simple. Like, it's not that difficult to understand what you would get, and I think that's part of the reason that the HomePod original has disappeared, because the HomePod Mini fills that consumer gap for most people, and no one really understood who the HomePod that was $350 was actually really for. And I do think in the Mac side of things as well, it's going to become a lot easier to tell, because your Pro MacBooks are going to be in the more darker colours, I think, and then we are going to get the MacBook Air that's going to be much more light and breezy. I saw Max Tech's video that they did just recently. Myself and Apple Tomorrow, who do all the renders that we use, we're also working on a white bezeled version, which unfortunately it came out a little bit more kind of chrome on the bezels, but we did that about the same time that I first mentioned having the colourful MacBooks in the first place. But yeah, really interesting to see that other people are kind of seeing that as well, and it does look like Apple is going to go down the kind of iBook route with the bright colours for the new MacBook Airs, which I, for one, am all in on. And into some iCave Answers.
Corvin asks, iCave Answers. In between the time the 2021 MBPs are released and the 2022 MBPs come out, should a professional buy an M1X or M2 MBP? Should they buy an M1X to take advantage of Core's 912, or the M2 to leverage the faster Avalanche cores? Or will Apple also come out with M2X to satisfy both needs? Or will M2 already have 12 cores?
For the vast majority of pros, if you are a real pro and not a pro because you want to have Pro written on your laptop, I would say that you would go for the M1X version or an M2X version, whichever one is the most current at the time. So it depends when you need it. You asked about whether the M2 is going to have 12 cores inside. No, not as far as we know. We would assume that the M2 is going to be the M1, but with the A15 based cores in it, with those faster Avalanche cores. But it's not going to make a massive, massive difference. The M1X is going to be about 80 to 100% faster than the M1, whereas the M2 is going to be about 25% faster, 20 to 25%. It completely depends on your workflow. For the majority of people, the current M1s are absolutely fast enough for most stuff. Depends what kind of pro you are. If you're doing video editing, that kind of thing, M1 will do you absolutely fine. If you're doing scientific, high-level scientific calculations, if you're trying to calculate the whole of climate change with your MacBook, you might want to go for the M1X.
Evan Rodgers asks, iCave Answers. Dave, how likely is it that Apple releases gaming-specific SDKs or other tools to allow for easy porting to macOS iOS at WWDC this year?
And actually, our next question also ties in with this, so we're going to answer them together.
Quezdon Ivey asks, iCave Answers, with the semi-letdown of the new Apple TV 4K, do you think 2022 to 2023 we will get a more gaming-style one, with a new headset coming soon?
Okay, so both of these are talking about gaming. I just want to address the thing for the Apple TV 4K. I don't really think they should have announced it. All they should have announced is Apple TV 4K now gets A12 and this is the new remote. And to be fair, they focused a lot more on that new remote than they did on the Apple TV itself. And that's for a very good reason. The A12 that they put in there to replace the A10X basically runs cooler, probably won't require the fan that was in the A10X version. So it's going to make their manufacturing a little bit cheaper and remove a point of failure. I would guess that there's going to be no fan in it, but we've got one on the way, so we will find out. The A12 is not really any faster than the A10X in any noticeable way, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. But in terms of gaming on Apple TV, this is something that we've talked about in the past, and certainly when we're talking about a gaming Apple TV for lounge type gaming, I do think that Apple is going to release something that looks like a TV top bar that will probably have motion sensors in it using LiDAR, because Apple is all in on LiDAR right now. They are doing some brilliant work with it. If you've used the new Clips app, I definitely recommend you should try it, because you can kind of scan your entire room, and then when you film yourself in that room, it can add lighting effects that kind of run across your floors and over your furniture, all sorts of cool stuff. And I can just imagine that being used in Apple TV for FaceTime, for like dance party type games. You know, do you remember the old, I can't remember what they were called, but the games where you would dance and you have to put your feet on the right spots. It was called Dance Party or something like that. But you could do that without having anything physically on your floor, and you can see on the screen where you're kind of putting your feet. Like, that would be really awesome. In terms of the new Apple AR headsets, I don't know how much they're going to push into gaming with it, whether that's going to be the focus or if it's going to be more fitness based. But I do think that the next Apple TV that they bring out is going to be a very different beast to what we have right now. I think it'll have a new form factor finally, and I actually think that the main reason that they've upgraded now is that they were basically just running out of A10X chips, and it's cheaper to make A12s. It doesn't need the cooling, and it performs just as well. But in terms of SDKs coming at WWDC, that would be really good. I would love it if they brought some stuff over that would make gaming a bit better on the Macs, or just a kind of developer tool that allows people that are making x86 games to use an equivalent to DirectX and those kind of technologies that just translated straight over to Metal. That would be a super easy way that they could bring a lot more games to the Mac quite quickly.
GB asks, ICave Answers. I wish Apple give more USB-C ports to charge iPad, iPhone, maybe even Ethernet like new iMac's Power Brick on the upcoming MacBook Pros. If Apple is really serious about reducing e-waste, and it will hurt a lot of third-party at the same time customers don't have to buy some unknown power adapter and damage their device. What's your thoughts on this?
Okay, first of all, don't expect to ever get USB-C ports on the iPhone. That's not going to happen. Ethernet in Power Bricks for MacBook Pros, that seems like the sort of thing that Apple might do. The only problem with that is that if we go down that route, then you're not going to be able to remove your USB cable from the Power Brick, almost certainly, which means that when the cable becomes frayed or damaged, you're going to have to throw it in the bin and get a new power adapter, because you'll also be dumping that Ethernet, and that will hurt more on e-waste than not having it there. At the same time though, I would say that there's not an enormous number of MacBook Pro users that would want Ethernet. I know that there are some when you get to a studio and you want to be able to plug into a server that maybe has all of your video files on it, something like that. I think for the majority of people, if you are going to use your MacBook Pro on a desk, you're also going to want a display. You're also going to want probably another keyboard and mouse, or more storage that you can attach. So at that point, it makes far more sense to have some sort of a hub that you plug in. Maybe what Apple could do is, if they are going to release their own displays, that could have a built-in hub. So you plug one cable into your MacBook Pro, and then that has your Ethernet, maybe via its Power Brick. Maybe you've got all of your USB stuff attached to that. That might make a lot more sense, because I think Apple will want to keep it as elegant as possible in terms of your desk setup. They're not going to want to have a bunch of stuff that has to be plugged in. And also, in your scenario, you would have to be plugged into the mains in order then to use Ethernet, which not everyone would want to do, but at the same time, if you're going to be at a desk using Ethernet, you might as well plug into power too. In terms of having to buy unknown power adapters and damage your devices though, you don't have to. You can always get the Apple ones. That's not really an issue, I don't think. But Apple is definitely really serious about reducing e-waste, and this is one of the things that I always bring up, is that people complain that you can't, like, upgrade the graphics on a Mac Mini. The whole thing is, like, e-waste when you get rid of it. But the board in a Mac Mini is, like, this big and a single sheet, whereas if you've got a desktop computer and you're upgrading your graphics card, you're throwing away like a house brick. Like, the mass of a graphics card is bigger than the whole of the Mac Mini, including the aluminium chassis, which is already recycled. So don't come at me with... and this is not aimed at you, GB, but do not come at me with Mac Minis are bad for the environment because you can't upgrade the graphics. If something goes wrong, you can't fix it. Actually, the amount of stuff that is on such a small card, such a small mainboard with Macs, like, throw the whole thing away and you've put out less e-waste than most sticks of RAM. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Quick show today, I guess, maybe, although it doesn't look like it from what I've recorded. So if you've got any questions, hashtag ICave Answers down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.